Ba-da-ba-ba. Hey everybody, I'm back. John Smale is back with Smales Pace. I'll tell you, I took a couple days off to be with my family, and you'd think I was missing in action, or people started to worry. It's like, where is he? Has he stopped making these podcasts? Does he care about us anymore? Is he bored? Is he spent? And as Tom Sawyer used to said once, anyway, he said, "I think the reports of my death have been greatly exaggerated. I am still here. I'm happily back." And today's podcast is about the art scene in London as it related to Smales Pace. Now, Smales Pace was a music venue. I always wanted it to be more. I always wanted it to be sort of an inclusive place for poets, writers, and art. Now, I love art. Full disclosure, I've always surrounded myself with good art, and I've always been supportive of the art community. London is known as the Forest City across Canada because of the number of trees and squirrels. And it is also known for the quality of the art community that populated the city. And over the years, it has produced a plethora of great artists, mostly in the modernist tradition, going back to, there was Paul, that was the original home of Paul Peel, the very fine classic artist back in the late 1800s. But it was a very progressive city when it came to the art scene. And as I said, many of them and some of them hung out at Smales Pace. Just go around the circle here and talk about some of the artists that are displayed here. Over on the right-hand side, that self-portrait, a very colorful self-portrait, is Greg Curnow. And Greg started at Forest City Gallery, and he was a force to be reckoned with. He was a leader of artists in London, and was known for many different styles and expressive styles at that. And he he started the Forest City Gallery with some other artists, and it was kind of like a movement, not unlike those happening in Europe, where a group of artists were known for their movement. And this was sort of a regional approach to art making, and it was about direct experience. And there's a Jack Chambers one there, for example, with the two kids sitting in the living room. It is so real and realistic and charming in its simplicity, and it's the setting that it's in, the narrative that it's talking about. We can all relate to that. That was sort of that, when I was talking about direct experience. Now back to Greg Curnow. The very center picture there above my big head is a group of artists who had another bent to them, and they were called the Nihilist Spasm Band, and it was all about experimentation with musical sounds. To many it sounded like cacophony, but it was free expression of tooting, blowing, sawing, homemade instruments, etc. And I think it was wonderfully experimental and something that one would associate with maybe the Greenwich Village scene in New York City or the Paris scene in the 20s. There are other artists shown here. Of course, when I was talking about Jack Chambers and that realistic, the two boys in the scene there, to the side of that is an expressive painting of the wind blowing and this person blowing in the wind with the chair rolling over and the tree blowing in the wind. That was Brian Jones. And that's a departure from the Brian Jones I knew when he hung out at Smales Pace. And I have a terrific painting of Brian's that's photorealistic, and photorealism is what you would associate it with Jack Chambers, with those two boys again, relating back to them. And then Brian changed his style. It became a little more fluid, more curves and expression of color and vibrancy. And Brian had lunch at Smales Pace many days of the week, and I used to trade art for him and trade stories. He was just a very positive artist that came out of the Beale Secondary School, which I think I knew so many young guys and gals from Beale Secondary School that went on. That was the introductory training for them, and they went on to higher learning sometimes, or maybe they understudied with artists like Brian understudied under Jack, for example. Now, there are some other artists shown here in this bottom corner. I'm kind of pointing over here, but my hand's going over there, and I'm not used to this ambidextrous thing here happening. But down in the corner, there's a wispy tree, and that's done by Philip Aizaz. And Philip was a very interesting artist and mover and shaker around town. He used to host parties for Smales Pace musicians. He had a beautiful house just on the edge of the University of Western Ontario campus. And Philip was a social guy, and I loved being there and being surrounded by this very quality art. And that's Philip there. Now, the Greg Curnow thing, you'll see the bicycle there. Greg did a whole bicycle series that was nationally renowned. And unfortunately, Greg died on a bicycle in a tragic accident where he was, I believe, taking a break at the side of the road in a country ride, and he was hit by a car. I hate to talk about those things because that's not the way I like to remember life. I like to celebrate life and remember the wonderful times and exploratory conversations we had, because talking with artists, graphic artists and artists that create palettes of work are much different than talking to musicians. There's a different vocabulary, a different narrative to the way they see life and the way they touch it. And an example of that would be, I don't see it on the screen here. I had this wonderful picture a photo by Ron Benner, who incorporated art into gardens. And it's unfortunately I don't have it there, because I thought that was such a brilliant idea to bring the art outdoors and put it within a scene that changed in the spring, in the summer, in the fall, in the winter. And I thought that was kind of brilliant indeed. And John Boyle, I wish I could point here. I forgot to turn my mouse onto a pointer thing there. Excuse me, please. Forgive me for that oversight and that ignorance of technology. John is looking at a collage there with a girl in the foreground, building in the background. That collage style was one of his fortes of mixing in media, of course, mixing photography with painting. And Michael Bidner, who I adored as an artist because he was so adventurous and so experimental, when Michael was given a Xerox machine, and Michael did more with that Xerox machine doing experiments than it was like giving a brush and a pile of paints to Van Gogh and say, go have some fun there, Vincent. And that's what Michael did with art. He was experimental. He tried everything. He used to go out on the street at night and dig through the trash along the main street, because he had a studio on the main drag. And across the hall from him was Hank Verboets, a very interesting Dutch-Canadian artist who was capable of doing so many styles. He could almost be an art impersonator if he wanted to be. I think he could paint any style or copy any style. In the bottom corner, this bright yellow one there, that's by Mick Durham. And Mick what a great supporter he was of Smales Pace. He was a professor, an instructor, a teacher at Fanshawe College, along with a lot of other very talented teachers. And Mick, he's known in the art world as Michael Durham, but we all knew him as Mick Durham. And he was from Leeds, England, and had this wonderful, drawling, funny accent. And he was, as I say, a terrific supporter of music. And that's a different style. And I had a piece for many, many years, which kind of went by I don't know what happened to it. Apologies to all. I've kind of lost track of it. It was a very 6 foot by 6 foot piece, and I had it for probably 40 years, and then it kind of disappeared. And So Mick did a lot of very, very large pieces. Now, it's important when I talk about the art in London and the Expressionism and all that. There was Nancy Poole was a gallery operator, and she was also an author, and she wrote about the art scene in London. It's quite a academic tome, as it were, cataloging and describing and celebrating the art of London artists. And Nancy had a gallery. Gee, I can't remember what street it was on. Was it Wellington or Waterloo? And it was a renowned Canadian gallery, and I used to walk by it a lot, and I'd go in, and I was kind of a bit of a bedraggled soul that one wouldn't usually find in an upscale art gallery. But I think when I went in there and kind of explained that I just love looking at art, that they understood that at the gallery. Oh, let him in. He kind of likes the stuff. And there was another great repository of art in London at the London Public Library on the second floor, which was, 100 feet from Smales Pace. So it was a wonderful place to go hang out and just stare at some of the best art I'd ever seen. Now, as I say, Smales Pace was known for the music scene, but it was also celebrating the art scene because it was there and it was popular, and it was. I wish we had more interaction with artists, but I think a lot of that got to happen at pubs we hung out at, and bars and house parties and gallery openings, and there was a wonderful gallery that opened over on Talbot Street. It was called Trajectory Gallery, and I think Stephen Joy ran that, or he was part of that, I recall. And that was always very exciting to go to art gallery openings there, because they were not as stuffy and formal as one would associate with a more established gentry kind of a gallery. It was more student oriented, and it was more experimental, and it was accepting of new generation art. And now I could talk so much more about the art scene and about other artists, and I've left off about 200 of those artists, but these are the ones that I knew around London at that time. And I'm glad I got to talk about them, because they were an important part of my life, important part of my young part of my life where I was growing up, learning appreciation for architecture, for art, for food and cuisine, and maybe wine, maybe other things too. But I'm glad I got to talk about this today. I hope you enjoyed this one. It's just another episode that deals with life at a time and place in my life. Hope you enjoyed it, and I'll talk to you real soon. And I am not missing an action. I'm still around. I'm still here, and I'll be coming back at you real soon. Bye-bye.